Back in the summer of 1998, I did a scientific experiment using myself as the subject. I attempted to see if a person could live for an entire month eating nothing but chicken wings. And the answer, well, I didn't die. I didn't get rickets or scurvy, so yeah. Though to be fair, I'm not a doctor. This is not dietary advice, but I say that because today, July 29th, is for kind of obtuse reasons National Chicken Wing Day. These national days are often just shameless marketing attempts. I'm okay with that. And it's not just me. Gabrielle Fontaine notes on the website of market research firm Gottnux that the United States ate an estimated 1.45 billion pounds of chicken wings in 2022, with the average American consuming 1.25 pounds in 2023, but sports fans reaching 2.2 pounds annually. And it wasn't just the United States. Fontaine writes that global consumption also sets the pace, with China consuming about 1.2 billion pounds of wings each year. Melissa Kravitz-Hoffner explained in a January 2026 edition of Forbes magazine that the National Chicken Council estimated that Americans would consume 1.48 billion chicken wings just during the 2026 Super Bowl. For perspective, she notes, to consume this many chicken wings, a single person would have to eat one wing every 30 seconds since the fall of the Roman Empire. That's a lot. In fact, so many that the Roman Empire would not have been able to supply them. In fact, the chickens that provide our wings are a relatively new development in chicken science, or poultry pondering, or hen handling. But before there could be hot wings, there had to be a new kind of chicken. I know, chickens always had wings, or at least paleontologists will argue that wings predate chickens, as wings evolved over 150 million years ago from the feathered forelimbs of ancestral theropod dinosaurs and early birds like Archaeopteryx, long before chickens or even modern birds existed. I don't have the answer to the chicken or the egg debate, but yes, wings predate chickens. So presumably, chicken wings have always been a thing, but only kind of. Keep in mind, this is my third episode on the history of chickens, so I have, shall we say, already barbecued a bit of this bird, but as a short summary, chickens were not always valued for their wings, or at least for their wing meat. In fact, and this always seems to surprise people, but the archaeological evidence suggests that chickens were first domesticated and spread via trade not for meat or for eggs, but for the entertainment value of cockfighting. And there were some thousands of years of human interaction before we even started breeding them primarily for eggs, more or less meat. Widespread eating of chickens didn't really start until the Hellenistic period, and then eggs were probably still the thing, and the bird was largely only eaten after egg production tapered off. And that was actually largely true for another millennium and a half. By the 1920s, chickens were still mostly raised for eggs, and largely not industrially so. The National Chicken Council notes that in the 19th century, early poultry production consisted of many households having backyard flocks of dual-purpose chickens. These chickens supplied eggs and an occasional chicken for Sunday or holiday dinner. This is not, of course, a means of production amenable to a billion baskets of wing bits. Things had to change. Notably, at the time, chickens had a specific problem. Marie Morris of the Ohio Farm Bureau explains. Chickens did not thrive in the winter. Egg production, incubation, and meat production in the winter were all very difficult, making poultry seasonal and expensive. The problem is that hens naturally stop laying eggs when the amount of sunlight declines. If there was going to be an excess of wings, someone had to figure out how to get chickens to treat winter like summer. The answer was artificial lighting, and this, of course, would have been something of a struggle in the centuries before Mr. Edison's light bulb. Perhaps the first successful use of artificial lighting to fool laying hens into thinking that winter is summer came, according to T.T. Milby and R.B. Thompson of the Oklahoma Agriculture Experiment Station in Stillwater, from a Dr. E.C. Waldorf in 1895. Working in Buffalo, New York by 1899, he claimed that by using his systematic lighting pattern, his hens averaged 10 eggs per week. The theory was tested and demonstrated by another chicken pioneer. James Garfield Jimmy Halpin was the first head of the Poultry Husbandry Department of the Michigan Agricultural College, now Michigan State University. In 1906, he, Milby and Thompson report, secured favorable results in increasing winter egg production from the experimental use of lights. The process took some time to develop, partly because ready access to electricity was also slow in coming. While Thomas Edison had opened the Pearl Street Power Station, bringing the first commercial electric power grid to parts of Manhattan in 1882, by 1910 only about 1 in 7 American homes had electrical wiring. Still, the commercial value of year-round chicken production meant, Milby and Thompson explained, by about 1920 the practice was in general use commercially. The process was not yet perfected. Milby and Thompson were writing in 1941, and the exact timing was still a matter of experiment. This and many other developments in poultry science, or fowl fathoming, was fortunate, as the nation's demographics were shifting. Michael T. Kidd of the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville, and Kenneth E. Anderson of North Carolina State University, Raleigh, noted in a 2019 edition of the Journal of Applied Poultry Research that the 20th century gave rise to rapid population growth in urban centers, and as a result, egg production for egg market distribution grew. There were many poultry-powered improvements in the era. In 1922, the first electrically heated incubator, the Petersheim No. 1, was introduced. Artificial incubation had been used since ancient times, and since the middle 19th century, incubators heated by numerous fuels such as coal and kerosene were used, but the electric incubator changed the game. Not only were they more precise, but they could be scaled up. Boyce Upholt writes in Noema magazine in 2023, an electronically heated chicken incubator may seem like a utilitarian device, but it is hard to overstate how much it altered the fate of the chicken. Instead of wasting months mating birds and rearing chicks, a farmer could outsource all the messy business of reproduction and receive in exchange a steady supply of chickens ready to lay eggs. This launched a new kind of business, the hatchery, where eggs could be nurtured until they hatch and then the chicks sent off to farms. McKenna explains that freed farmers from having to choose and maintain breeding stock, and also from losing the months in a hen's short productive life when she would be hatching her eggs instead of laying more. Now they could outsource those tasks to a new tier of the industry. Thousands of hatcheries shipped newborn chicks by mail. But McKenna notes it didn't change the chickens. The breeds those chicks came from were still selected for maximum egg production, not for any eating pleasure they might offer after their laying years ended. The focus remained on eggs. David Latch of the University of Wisconsin-Madison Division of Livestock Extension notes on its webpage, the emphasis in chicken production was on egg production. Standard bred and land races of chickens met the need for white or brown-colored eggs. Meat was a byproduct, provided when the layer's egg production diminished, or by low-value young cockerels that were raised with the high-value replacement pullets. This represented an issue. In 1920, the American Professional Football Association, the precursor to the National Football League, was formed in Canton, Ohio. The nation was already leading down the path that would become the Super Bowl, and the wings from the hens that didn't lay enough eggs for Mrs. Tweedy was not going to meet demand. Before the nation faced Super Bowl Sunday, the poultry producers needed a dedicated eating chicken, a broiler. The path to get the required roosters and hankering for hens may have started to shift as a result of an accident. The National Chicken Council writes that Mrs. Wilmer Steele of Sussex County, Delaware, is often cited as the pioneer of the commercial broiler industry. Lila Nolan writes on the website Ag Clips that Steele accidentally ordered 500 chicks instead of the 50 she intended. Rather than cancel the order, Steele raised the extra chicks and sold them as meat, marking the start of commercial-scale poultry farming. Steele's unexpected success signaled the potential for raising chickens specifically for meat, known as broiler farming. The council writes that her little business was so profitable that by 1926, Mrs. Steele was able to build a broiler house with a capacity of 10,000 birds. Still, they note, eggs ruled the roost. The seeds of change were sown in the 1920s and 30s when specialized egg farms began to expand in New England and the Midwest. A few specialized broiler operations appeared in the Delmarva, that's Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia region, but not enough to make a significant difference in the supply of chicken meat. The Second World War then dramatically increased demand. The website of the South Dakota State University Agricultural Heritage Museum explains that many items were rationed during World War II, and one of which was meat. Beef and pork were suddenly limited, but not poultry, which presented difficulties getting them to the troops. And as such, chicken became much more what's for dinner, although the museum notes this was a change in mindset for many as they didn't believe poultry to be a protein. So re-education occurred. Tay Silver explains on her website, The Silver Homesteader, that alongside their encouragement to create victory gardens, the government also had a victory flock initiative. The idea was for people to raise chickens in their backyard. A 1943 pamphlet noted a small flock of chickens may aid the family with a victory garden to produce more food for home use, provided the chickens are kept out of the garden and local regulations allow chickens to be kept. The Agricultural Heritage Museum explains that poultry production encouragement caused many backyard flocks of chickens and turkeys to crop up. By not taking other meat sources from the troops, patriotism stirred in poultry production. The government was quite happy to provide education on hen husbandry, explaining concepts like the best use of artificial lighting. Silver writes that posters, pamphlets, informational billets, printed bulletins, and catalogs seem to all be encouraging victory gardens and victory flocks. Citizens must have felt inundated by the deluge of information available to them. The domestic consumption of poultry skyrocketed. Per capita consumption of chicken went from around 18 pounds during the 1930s to 31 pounds in 1943. The museum writes that the U.S. Department of Agriculture reported that South Dakota chicken production increased from 9.1 million birds in 1942 to 11.5 million in 1944. The production of chickens and turkeys increased dramatically in the early 1940s, which also boosted morale. This increased production did not, however, do much for broiler chickens. While some broilers were included, production still focused on eggs. Eggs could be dehydrated and sent to troops, and so the vast bulk of industrial chicken farming was used for that purpose. But even at home, where people were eating more poultry than ever before, Maren McKenna writes in a 2018 edition of National Geographic, choosing birds for how many eggs they could lay was a smart strategy through the privations of the Great Depression and the restrictions of World War II. It maximized the protein you could get from a bird without sacrificing the bird herself. It wasn't the demands of the war, but the competition that came after that gave rise to the broiler chicken bonanza. But after the war, McKenna writes, when beef and pork emerged from rationing, eggs seemed dull by comparison, and laying hens' lack of tasty muscle made them an insufficient alternative. People had willingly cut their meat eating for a long time to support the war. Now, they wanted to indulge. Latch writes that the return of GIs following World War II brought about major changes in American society. America was exporting beef and pork to war-torn Europe, and the baby boom created a high demand for inexpensive protein. This created the urgency for the poultry industry to develop a fast-growing and efficient meat-type chicken. The solution would come from the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, otherwise known as the A&P. The nation's largest grocery chain was also the nation's largest retailer of chicken. And in 1945, A&P was interested in improving the quality of the nation's broiler chickens. Working with the Department of Agriculture, and McKenna writes, with the backing of A&P and the support of every major poultry and egg organization in the country, the USDA sponsored the Chicken of Tomorrow contest. This series of contests set specific standards designed around a chicken that would grow bigger and faster and produce larger amounts of breast and thigh meat. To encourage participation, A&P offered a $10,000 prize. State contests, beginning in 1946, went on to regional contests and finally ended with a national competition with 40 finalists, held at the University of Delaware's Agricultural Experiment Station in 1948. Latch explains that eggs were submitted for hatching at specially built facilities, where the chickens were hatched and raised in controlled conditions on a standard diet. The chicks were closely tracked and monitored for weight gain, health, and appearance, and after 12 weeks, the birds were slaughtered, weighed, and judged according to the standard scorecard. The program came with a lot of publicity. Alex Coe reported in Modern Farmer magazine in 2014 that the A&P and the USDA wanted to get the public excited about eating more chicken, which they prepared for various dinners during the finals, in addition to sponsoring concerts, dances, a parade, and a rodeo. There was even a Chicken of Tomorrow queen. The top two prizes went to a line of white Plymouth Rocks bred by Henry Saglio of Connecticut and a hybrid of the East Coast New Hampshire and West Coast Cornish bred by Charles Bantress of California. That's right. Ultimately, the two lines were crossed, giving us the red-shouldered, pea-combed Cornish rock cross-meat chicken. Today's broilers are white and single-combed hybrids. The result transformed the industry, shifting from purebreds to scientific principles of genetics. Egg hatcheries could mass-produce the new breed, but the hybrid chickens could not breed true if farmers mated them on their own land, forcing farmers to buy new chicks from breeding companies every single cycle. And it produced a fat, meaty, fast-growing chicken. Latch explains that the winner produced a 4-pound broiler in 12 weeks with 12 pounds of feed. He notes that virtually all of the world's 20 billion chickens alive today can trace ancestry back to the two breeds from the contest. Between 1950 and 1960, the poultry business shifted rapidly from a small farm sideline into a modern industrialized agribusiness. Annual output surged from roughly 631 million birds in 1950 to over 1.8 billion birds in 1960. U.S. annual per capita consumption of broilers rose from roughly 13 to 15 pounds to 23.6 pounds by 1960. Total production expanded roughly five-fold over the broader 1950s decade as chickens shifted from a rare luxury to an everyday staple. Pressure frying techniques allowed the growth of large chains. Kentucky Fried Chicken, Church's Chicken, and Chicken Delight were all started in the 1950s. The wings that we're supposed to celebrate today were invented in Buffalo, New York, and so no Buffalo hot wings has nothing to do with the animals that compete in tourist chucking competitions. There are competing stories. The most popular is that the recipe, which is essentially segmented wings, deep-fried, coated in a mix of butter and Frank's Red Hot sauce and served with celery and blue cheese dressing, was invented in 1964 by Teresa Bellissimo, who with her husband Frank owned the Anchor Bar in Buffalo. The wings were an impromptu recipe, created either, as the story goes, because some wings had been delivered to the bar by mistake, or alternatively, as a snack made in a pinch for some of her son's friends late at night. The Anchor Bar still exists, still serves hot wings, although the bar is no longer owned by the Bellissimos. Another story has the idea coming from John Young, who operated a restaurant in Buffalo called Wings and Things, and in the early 1960s served wings fried with a tomato-based mambo sauce. Young claims that it was his restaurant that inspired the Bellissimos, although purists point out that Young's wings were breaded and fried whole, not sectioned. The website of Buffalo radio station WYRK explains the origin of the chicken wing and who gets to claim the title of being the first to serve them in western New York is a suicide sauce level hot topic in certain circles. But it was clearly the Bellissimos model, fried, sectioned, not breaded, served with blue cheese and vegetables that we most recognize today, even if they have expanded to numerous flavors and even include blasphemies like substituting ranch for blue cheese or boneless wings. The city of Buffalo declared what has become National Chicken Wing Day on July 29, 1977. Why July 29th? That seems never to have been explained. But some suggest that Buffalo Mayor Stan Murkowski was trying to raise morale after a devastating blizzard that January killed 23 people in western New York. To highlight the connection to popular culture, Buffalo now hosts an annual Buffalo Wing Festival, but oddly, the festival was inspired by a fictional festival from the 2001 movie Osmosis Jones. The festival website notes, Bill Murray starred as a compulsive eater with the goal of attending the Super Bowl of junk food, the National Buffalo Wing Festival. Ironically, there wasn't one. It is an example of life following art. So why did hot wings become so popular? Well, one argument is that they're connected to American football, which is a sport that is usually communally watched, and wings are a particularly good fit for that because they are easily shareable. Some people argue that restaurants actually like to serve them because the spice on the hot wings helps to sell beer. Some will argue that their popularity rose with the rise of the Buffalo Bills, the National Football League team that at least participated in 4 consecutive Super Bowls back in the 1990s. One reason that they became more popular is that wing meat was, well, cheap. Wings are just 30% meat, and so they weren't a preferred cut. They were often just discarded or boiled into broth, and so they were less expensive than other pieces of chicken. But ironically, the demand for wings has driven up the price so that now at the store, wings are going to cost you about twice as much per pound as drums or thighs, and there's a significant markup at most restaurants. For only being as old as, well, I guess I am, wings could never have become the popular treat that they are today if it weren't for a series of technological developments in chicken science that occurred over the first half of the 20th century that transformed one of the world's oldest foods. So what do you think? Flats or drums or boneless? Does it have to be blue cheese or is ranch acceptable? Let me know in the comments. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop or book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.